What is the scariest, strangest, most unexplainable thing that has happened to you while home alone? Was 17 years old, left alone from Thursday to Sunday with our family's dog, who was pretty small and starting to have trouble climbing stairs in his old age. I'd be working every morning while my parents were out of town. Came home from my shift on Friday and everything about the kitchen table was a mess. Napkins were taken out of the holder, all of the mail was thrown on the floor, salt and pepper shaker on the other side of the kitchen but together, and one of the chairs pulled far away from the table. Our dog's never done anything like this, and I'd be especially surprised if he was even capable of climbing on top of the table. I reset it all. Saturday, I come back to find the exact same configuration. Don't have the pictures anymore, but every detail was just as I found it the day before. Pretty much the entire night I'm convinced there's gonna be a ghost coming to get me, and I sleep horribly and barely rest for work on Sunday. I leave for work and make sure the place was orderly when I left, because I knew my parents would be back before I was out of work. When I go on my lunch break, I call my mom and ask about all of the details from the past 2 days, and she just goes, "Yeah, why did you leave such a mess?" She didn't get pictures, so I can't verify how similar the mess was, but regardless, I can't believe my old dog would have done that, for the details 3 consecutive days, and I don't even know if he was strong enough to move the chairs or climb on the table. Only time anything like this ever happened while I was left alone. My husband works a weird schedule where he has to be at work at 3 a.m. I wake him up at 2 a.m., get his lunch together, and then I go back to bed until my alarm at 5 a.m. I don't always go back to sleep right away because he is wandering around showering and getting dressed and making obscene amounts of noise. He usually leaves right around 2:50 a.m., then I'm good to go back to sleep. Anyway, about a month ago, I woke back up at 4:30ish on a Friday morning. I swore I heard someone knocking. We have doorbell cameras at both doors, so I checked my phone. Nothing. The kids were in bed with me and the dog was still sound asleep, so I knew it wasn't them. I decided it must have been a dream, but it freaked me out enough that I didn't go back to sleep. He was home for the next 2 nights, no knocking. I didn't think anything about it. Early Monday morning? Same time, same place. Check the cameras? Nothing there. Kids and dog all snoring. Repeat for 3 more days. I became more and more convinced that someone was fucking with me, but I couldn't figure out why. If someone was really watching the house, they would know that I was alone after 3 a.m. with the kids. It's easy enough to break in ground level windows all around, and our doors aren't anything special. No reason to expend all this effort trying to get me up and out of bed to open the door. My irritability was growing as my sleep deprivation increased. I was having a harder and harder time sleeping after 3 a.m. because I was anticipating the knocking. I was mostly just kind of hanging out in bed and waiting. Finally, I decided to just stay awake and catch the person in the act. I set myself up in the living room, iced coffee, TV on, phone in hand, fully upright so I wouldn't fall asleep. Nothing happened. No more knocking. Just an idiot sitting on the couch for 2 hours, losing more sleep. My theory is that I was dreaming of someone knocking that first night and I woke up mid-dream, unable to distinguish reality from dream. I didn't have to wake up in the middle of the night the next 2 nights, so I slept better and deeper. He went back to work and the weird dream started again because I wasn't sleeping solidly. The human mind does some crazy things. After I was able to look at it with a clearer perspective, and a few hours of sleep, I realized there was no way anyone could have been knocking at the door. I have a miniature dachshund. He barks at anything. A squirrel farting outside can result in a 5-minute barking frenzy. Knocks on the door cause hysteria. There is no way he would have slept through someone knocking at 4 a.m. I'm an idiot. When I was a child, I had life-size, aka 3 feet tall, Power Ranger dolls. I usually kept them in my room stationed around my canopy bed to guard me at night. One day I was planning to take them all to preschool for show and tell. I was like 4 or 5. As I was preparing them to come downstairs with me, the red Power Ranger came to life and pushed me down the stairs. I only vaguely remember this incident, but when I brought it up recently at a family gathering, my mom said that it wasn't the first time I had mentioned the red Power Ranger being lifelike, and that I had frequently been heard talking to people in that particular apartment. The incident of me being pushed down the stairs apparently frightened my parents so much that they took me away and we stayed with my grandmother until my parents could find a new apartment to live in. Needless to say, the Power Rangers did not move with us. One night I had forgotten to lock my apartment door and woke up in the middle of the night. My bedroom door was about 2 feet from my front door, as you walked into the apartment. First a big dog ran by, then a person. Holy shit, I was so scared and I screeched, "Who is it?" A man said, "It's Doug." As I was thinking to myself, "Who the fuck is Doug?" he said, "Oh, shit." He turned around to go back out the front door saying sorry. I asked, "Didn't you have a dog with you?" He said, "Oh, Yeah. Hey, come on. He left, his dog ran out after him and I locked my front door. Edit, glad you all thought this was funny, because I did too, once my heart quit trying to beat right out of my chest. The next day the girls at work thought I was crazy for not being upset, but done is done. Peace. My brother, 12, and I, 14, were alone at home while our mom was away somewhere, probably away for work or SMTH. It was like 1 a.m. and it was raining like crazy. I was about to head to bed and I saw my brother had turned off his room's lights as well. I went to bed and fell asleep. My sleep was promptly interrupted by loud banging on glass. It was coming from our living room's glass door. I was scared a little but decided to check. I opened my door a tiny bit, my room was straight across from the living room's glass door, and take a peek through our almost pitch black living room toward the glass door and spot someone on the other side of the glass standing in the pouring rain. I couldn't really make out what that person looked like and I didn't really try to find out, as I immediately pulled myself backward to prevent him from seeing me. The banging didn't seem to stop and it was mind-numbingly loud, it really felt like the glass was about crack at any moment. I got on my knees and hands and tried to crouch toward my brother's room checking if he's okay. There were some chairs in the line of sight towards the floor so while crouching it would have been hard to spot me. I got to my brother's room and opened it. He was terrified sitting in his bed in the corner of the room. And just as I was about to grab the phone and call the police the banging stopped. I decided not to call because I am introverted AF and I honestly was just really tired so I went to sleep. To this day I do not know who that was. My sister and I were home alone and we heard someone big running up the stairs. The stairs make lots of noise with slight pressure so when there's someone big on them you can tell. I went out of my room to check but saw no one anywhere and my sister also came out of her room and she asked if that was me. I said no and we both looked around to see if there was anyone but found no one in the whole house. We were confused and called our parents and just waited until they got back and that was that. Not really home alone, but when I was little I remember as my dad was taking us to bed, I ran up first to sneak behind my bedroom door. The plan was to jump out and scare my brother before bed, as my bedroom was just opposite the bathroom and he had to walk past it to get to his room. However, behind the bedroom door was two strange men hiding. One had a beard and long hair, the other I don't clearly remember, but think he was very skinny. The guy with long hair whispered to me to go away, so I calmly went away and slept with my dad. Mum was working nights and this wasn't uncommon for me so he never questioned it. I was rightly spooked, and didn't want to be on my own, but didn't told my dad what I saw as I was petrified inside. Straight up thought I'd been told off by some creepy ghosts. We were robbed that night. My brother also woke up that night to go to the bathroom and saw the downstairs light on from the staircase. At the time he thought it was our mother, and would normally if he got up early run down and see her. For some reason he didn't go downstairs that night and instead hopped in bed with me and our dad too. When my mum came home the downstairs was trashed and she was terrified something happened to us. She ran upstairs in a panic and found us all in bed safe and sound. Home insurance was able to salvage most of the losses, and we got a dog not long after that as a deterrent for thieves, which growing up never had another issue again. So I guess not really unexplainable but strange, scary story. I managed to lock myself out of my house on my birthday during a tornado while trying to bring my cats to the basement for safety. I later found out that the tornado was approximately a couple miles or less from me at that exact time. The sky was green and it got weirdly calm and then I could hear what sounded like a train coming before I found an unlocked window to climb through. Wild times. Back in high school I'd usually be up all hours of the night playing games. I had a large dog at the time that would sleep in my room at night. It was 2 a.m. and I was finally headed to bed but my dog wasn't with me so I ventured out to find him. I made my way across the house to the kitchen/dining room combo. I'm standing in the only door frame that leads to that side of the house. We had an island in the kitchen with a stool that the junk mail was usually kept on. So I walk up, call for my dog, and see him walk from behind the island to behind the dining room table set, knocking all the junk mail down as he did so. I huff and flip on the light, no dog. I freak out, scramble back across the house, and end up finding him in my parents' room. I regale the story the next day to my parents and younger sister, who often claim to see stuff in the house. My sister pipes up and goes, "Oh, that's the tall black thing. Yeah, sometimes it likes to crawl around on all fours." Big nope. I wasn't home alone, but I was awake by myself one Saturday morning in the 80s when I was around 7 or so. I believe my mom was the only one home because my dad went to the lake to go fishing that weekend, and I'm not sure where my older brothers were, maybe they went with him, Ike. Anyways, my mom's sleeping in, and I'm in the living room by myself, watching Saturday morning cartoons and making a fort out of sheets and cushions. Something made me turn around and I saw my dad in his pajamas standing in the hallway entrance with his hands on his hips, looking the mess I was making and shaking his head. He then turned around and walked into my room, which was just off the hallway entrance. Dude. I didn't even look, I just booked it to my parents' room and woke my mom up. I don't remember what happened after that, this was around 35 years ago. And yes, my dad was fine, nothing had happened to him. I don't generally believe in ghosts, but here's a weird one from high school. Not my home obviously, but I was alone in the bathroom when this happened. My school bathrooms had really loud heavy doors. The door to the bathroom and the stall doors were so creaky there was no way you wouldn't hear someone coming in or leaving. One day my friend group was on the benches near the washroom, so at some point during lunch I go to use it. I was in one of 3 stalls probably browsing my phone or pooping when I hear someone come in crying and shut herself in the stall furthest from me. I was one end of the wall, she was the other, so I couldn't see her feet from my stall. I asked if she was okay but didn't get a response, she just kept crying. I finished my toilet business and left my stall to go knock on her stall door and see if she was okay. The bathroom was empty, the stall doors were all open and I didn't hear anyone leave either the stall or the bathroom exit. I even walked into the stall I thought she was in and checked. Honestly, when this happened I thought I just wasn't paying attention and didn't hear the girl leave, but then about a week or 2 later it happened again in the same bathroom. My friends knew I didn't believe in ghosts, but when I told them they could all tell I wasn't joking. I got up in the middle of the night to pee and happened to glance out the window to my backyard to see a glowing yellow figure that looked like it was collecting soil samples from my backyard. I absolutely shat myself and bumped into the sink. The figure stopped what it was doing and looked at me. I bolted back to my room and woke my wife, but when we went back it was gone. Funny thing is, I've told this story to other people and the wife of a friend of mine burst into tears and said she had seen the same thing when she was a child but nobody believed her. People asking for more detail, it looked to be about 7 feet tall, as when it stood up it was well taller than my fence. I couldn't make out any detail because it was glowing so strongly and my adrenaline was pumping like crazy, and I live in very populated suburban Sydney. It was also between 2 to 3 a.m. Also it was through a fly-acrene and open window from upstairs bathroom. This happened a while ago. I was at home by myself on a call with some friends when all of a sudden my dog begins to bark like crazy, which was odd since it was the middle of the night and he's usually asleep. I go downstairs to check on him and find him barking at our hall closet. Terrified, I grabbed my bat that I keep in my room just in case and opened the door. There was nothing out of usual at first, and then I looked down and noticed a familiar looking object at the bottom of the closet. It was my mom's necklace she had lost when I was 9. I showed it to my mom at breakfast and she was just as shocked as I was. I still have no clue how it got there or how my dog knew it was in there. Definitely one of the oddest occurrences of my life. I grew up in a very rural area. Our house was on the end of a dead-end road in the middle of Midwest farm country. In high school I was in cross country and track and found it easiest to run in the late evenings on nights when there wasn't practice. One night, which was fairly well lit by the moon, I was running the last quarter mile to my house and I saw someone else running toward me on the road from the direction of my house. I live on a dead-end road. There is nothing but farm fields behind it, and it definitely wasn't my mom running. It surprised me so much I stopped for a second to consider what I was seeing. I remember exactly what the runner was wearing, and I watched her run another 5 or 6 strides towards me before she disappeared or blended into the night like the Predator or some such. Now it could have been exhaustion or dehydration, I guess, but I've run a lot farther and a lot longer than I did that night without seeing anyone materialize and evaporate. I never did again, either on that road or anywhere else. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I ran home crying panic tears, and I am not ashamed to tell you about it. I couldn't bring myself to run at night again for a month. The first house I moved into out of high school while going to college was a very old, very small house in a town that dated back to the Civil War. I lived there with 3 other guys since rents were high, but we made it work. The house was built on a hill and had a small driveway in front with a U-shaped driveway in back. It had a full basement, and was owned by someone with multiple rental properties in the area. They told us we had full access to the upstairs, but that they used the downstairs for storage, and to never go down there because it was full of their stuff. We never questioned it, because the rent for this particular location for our area was low. We were still technically on campus, but our house was surrounded by other college students, so we could have parties whenever we wanted to. Everything was great until we started having unwanted visitors. At first, things were pretty easy to ignore or completely write off. A roommate home by themselves would walk into a room and the lights would be on when they were home alone and hadn't flipped any switches. Someone else would hear a faucet turn on and off in a room with no one in it. We tried to do what research we could at the time and found that water pressure can cause faucets to do some crazy things on their own, and that power surges can do similar things with flickering lights. Unfortunately, Things kept getting stranger. At one point, one roommate, who was home alone, got out of the shower, looked into the mirror to start shaving, and noticed that someone else stepped out of the shower behind him and left the room. He searched the house, but couldn't find anyone else home at the time. Later on, a different roommate had several items go missing out of his room, including his keys and a pocket knife. He later found them in our microwave. Again, no one else was home at the time. Me, personally, I got home on a day when nobody else was at the house for the next couple of hours in between classes. There was a folding chair on the front porch next to the door, and I had an armload of books. I set the books down in the chair, unlocked, and pushed open the front door, turned and picked up my books, and, when I went to walk into the house, the door slammed in my face. I thought the wind had caught the door and went to open it, but discovered that the door had locked itself again, both handle and deadbolt. Last of all, 3 of us were sitting together on a couch watching TV when we heard a loud, heavy thud, as though something had been dragged off of a bed in a back bedroom. All 3 of us later confirmed that we could distinctly hear both footsteps walking through the house as well as the sound of something heavy being dragged behind. Last of all, the back door opened and slammed shut, even though we were all in the living room, and there was supposed to be no one else in the house. A week later, we started to smell gas in the house. We called the authorities in the middle of the night and they searched the house with us waiting on the front lawn. Finally, they told us that they couldn't find a gas leak and asked us to open the basement. We had never been in there, at our landowner's request, but since the fire department was asking, we opened the garage door. Right in front of us was a Honda Shadow motorcycle with a large pool of gasoline underneath it where the gas tank had apparently leaked underneath it and the rest of the house. The firefighters saw this and decided to leave, while we were left to look around the rest of the basement. Most of what we found was shelves and shelves of canned vegetables, but in the very middle of the floor, under everyone's bedrooms, was a mortuary table and a second device. I'm still not sure what the second device was. It was cylindrical, with a small viewport in the front door. It seemed to have some places on the back for hoses or pipes to connect to it, although nothing was attached when we found it. It was about the right size for a couple of 2 liters of soda to fit inside. Soon after, we found out that our landowner worked night shifts at a local hospital. Whatever it might have been, we decided that enough was enough and we all decided to move out as soon as our leases were up. I was the last one there, and I promise that the last 7 days I spent there alone are the longest days I've spent anywhere since. I am a self-described cynic who doesn't believe in the supernatural, but I can also admit when I have absolutely no explanation for a set of events. I'm sure some Reddit scientists will be able to explain everything that happened to me now that many years have passed, but I don't need their explanations anymore. I just accept that being in old houses alone is not a good idea, and do my best to avoid them altogether. When I was younger I used to live in this super old, shitty house in the middle of the woods. There was a small clearing, with an average-sized yard and the rest was thick woods. One night I was walking up to our gate to go inside and I seen a very tall figure looking in my bedroom window. My light was on, which was weird since I hadn't been in there, or turned it on, so I could see the figure with its face and hands pressed up against my window. Whatever or whoever it was must have heard me because they looked in my direction before booking it to the back of the yard, and presumably into the woods since there was nowhere else to go and the backyard area wasn't fenced in. I never slept in that room again. When my dad died, I was in my family home by myself and I kept hearing a small bell ringing. I'd lived there for years and never heard the bell before or since. I searched around the house and it was coming from my mom's bedroom. On the window ledge was a small porcelain bell but it didn't have the ringer inside. I went back downstairs and the ringing started again. I rang my mom at work and asked her if she knew where it could be coming from. She broke down crying and said years before I was born her and my dad had agreed to ring the bell if they ever died to let the other person know they were okay. I'm almost certain I never knew this story. I was in my college apartment and my roommate had just moved out. Her room was directly across from mine with the living room between us. I had cleaned out her room and then closed the door. I left my bedroom door open when I went to take a shower one night. My bathroom was connected to my bedroom. I also happened to leave the bathroom door open. While I was in the shower, I thought I heard a woman talking. I had never been able to hear my neighbors talking before, but figured they just happened to be talking in their bathroom which shared a wall or something. When I got out of the shower, I was surprised to see a black void when there should have been the bright white closed door of my old roommate's door reflecting in the moonlight. I figured I just forgot to close the door and went and closed it. The next night I once again went to take a shower and left my room and the bathroom door open. But this time I checked to make sure the other door was latched and the front door was double locked. When I came back out I once again saw the void with the door wide open. I slammed my door closed and locked that shit so fast. I convinced myself there was a logical explanation, so the next night I once again checked all of the doors and then closed my bedroom door. This time, I came out of the shower and my bedroom door was open along with the other door. I showered and slept with my bedroom door locked from that point on. I guess this took place over several nights home alone, and I may not have even been alone. Still the creepiest thing that ever happened though. In grade 9 my best friend and I were having a sleepover at my house. My parents and younger brother were visiting family, so we were home alone. After it was dark outside we started watching a movie. We were laying on separate couches, watching the TV that was situated next to a door frame that leads to the kitchen, bedrooms and basement. In a matter of seconds, I see a feminine figure standing in the doorway, facing me, and for some reason I instinctively said, "Don't leave me." My friend laying on the other couch also saw the figure and said to me, "Don't worry, he'll go away in a second," thinking it was my younger brother. The figure just faded away, kind of like mist, into the other room. We looked at each other and realized what had just happened, then quickly turned on all the lights and sat on the same couch. We're 28 now. Still have absolutely no idea who or what that was or why I said that, but I still think about it often. One night I wasn't feeling very well and the upstairs had a larger bathroom. Downstairs was an old half bath and I wanted to leave that for her if my wife needed to use it at night, so I figured I might as well sleep in the guest room. My wife did not have a problem with this as she had work early the next day and I was constantly getting out of bed with food poisoning. At some point in the night I awoke to the door slowly creak open and a female voice asking if I was feeling alright. I assumed it was my wife and replied, "Yes honey, I'm fine, see you in the morning." But the door never closed and no footsteps went down the stairs as I would have heard them in this 1800s home, original wood floors and stairs. We were alone in the house that night. Edit, I asked my wife about it the next morning and she said never came up to check on me, let alone wake up during the night. I was facing away from the door when it happened and the unexpected silence following the question made me turn over to check. The door was wide open, no lights were on, and no footsteps. I wasn't alone, but I was alone if you get my drift. I took care of my mom during her final years with dementia. Every day was hard, but others seemed impossible. On really rough days I'd go into the garage to decompress, smoke pot, cry, rage, scream and sometimes hit trash cans with a baseball bat. Well, one particularly hard day, my mom had smeared feces all over the house. So, I was in the garage sobbing and mumbling incoherently to myself, when I said, out loud, to my previously deceased father, "Dad, I need help, what do I do?" When suddenly the garage door into the house swung open on its own and I went into some kind of trance and was able to clean up the house without having a complete meltdown. I can't explain it, but I'm pretty sure my dad was guiding me through the worst of it all. Many years ago when my now 28-year-old daughter was still an infant, me, her, and our dog were at the apartment we were living in at the time. My wife was at work, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, my daughter was asleep on a blanket pallet on the floor, and the dog, a German Shepherd, Wolf hybrid mix, was about 10 feet away laying in the doorway between our kitchen and the living room area. At any rate, I was watching whatever it was that I was watching when all of a sudden, Thor, our dog, starts with this low-level, guttural growling. I figured that he had heard someone in another apartment or walking by through the parking lot and don't think much of it. As a few seconds pass, I notice that it's getting louder and I can see out of the corner of my eye that he has lifted his head up off his paws, his ears are perked, and he's looking up at the ceiling over where my daughter was laying. I look up, don't see anything, tell him to knock it off. Right after I tell him to knock it off, he jumps up, starts circling my sleeping daughter, literally walking around the pallet she's laying on, and growling more and more intensely, even stopping once and outright snarling and snapping his teeth, all while staring up at the ceiling. After about 2 minutes of this, and me having no clue on what to do since I can't see anything and I do not want to reach for my daughter with him circling her like that, he laid down next to my daughter, rested his head on her back, and stayed there for almost an hour, still intently staring up at the ceiling and occasionally growling. To this day, I have no idea what the hell was going on or what he saw, sensed, but it was extremely creepy to me. Something similar happened to me. I was alone in my apartment with my big sweet dog and I was sitting on the floor between the couch and coffee table. I suddenly get this overwhelming sense of doom and a feeling I am not alone. A second later my dog starts growling at a spot a few feet away. Nothing there, of course. The feeling is getting more intense by this time and then my dog literally just throws her body over mine and won't move and is still barking and growling. After a few minutes the air seems to lighten and she gets off if me. I have had her 11 years and that has only happened one time. She is a sweet, quiet and smart dog who, when we lived in an apartment complex, only barked at footsteps of people who didn't live there. I guess she learned the familiar sounds. Apparently she even recognized how my car sounded compared to others, cause so said she would get excited only when my car pulled up. I trusted her instinct and still do. We don't deserve dogs, they are so amazing. Edit typos. Not home alone, but upstairs alone. I saw a doppelganger of my mom a few years back, and I think she heard mine. I was sitting in my bed, and looked up when I heard her coming up the stairs. She walked by my door, looking straight at me with no expression, and walked into her room and closed the door. I'd said hi as she walked but figured whatever, she didn't hear me or maybe she was getting something from her room. Then, about 5 seconds later, she yells up the stairs from downstairs and says, "Did you call me?" And I am not ashamed to say I freaked the fuck out. She came upstairs, looked down the hall and said, "Did you close my door?" I didn't, and neither did she. She never closed that door because one of our cats primarily lived in her bedroom and so she always kept the door open so the cat could come and go as she pleased. And it wasn't just closed as if the wind had shut it, it was fully closed and the windows were shut. Ma said she had very clearly heard me yell, "Hey mom, come here," from upstairs. I had done no such thing. I'm never entirely sure what I believe and what I don't, but I was totally sober, not tired, and it wasn't some movement out of the corner of the eye thing. A house her family lived in for a while when she was a kid had an attic that ran the length of the house, and the access was through a door in the back of her brother's closet at the far end. Their parents forbid them from messing around up there because it was filled with boxes from previous tenants. Landlord said, "I don't care if you look through them, but I don't know what's in there, so do so at your own risk, and because if someone got hurt by something falling on them or something, it might go unheard/unnoticed until too late." To make things weirder, at the very back end of the attic, so right above her bedroom, was a little locked room. Well, friend starts getting woken up at night by the sound of someone moving around quietly, which always turns into rapid, quiet creaking, almost right above her. She figures it's her brother. Because he'd have to cross over their parents' room as well, she figured he'd get caught eventually, and just did her best to ignore the sound or think about what a teenage boy might be doing to cause it. One day during the summer, she slept in on a weekend. When she woke up, she looked outside and saw her parents working on the big produce garden they'd put in. She went and got some breakfast, then went back up to her room to play with her Game Boy. For the first time after months of getting woken up, she heard the noises during the day. Curious to catch him in the act, she crept to her brother's room. The closet door was open. The attic access was open. She quietly went up the steep and narrow stairs until she could just peek in, and saw first that a path had been cleared, and then that the mattress her dad had wedged in front of the little room had been slid aside. Most surprising, however, was that the locked door at the back was ajar. Her brother stuck his head out, saw her right away, and smiled, calling her over. "You gotta come see this." And then pulled back inside of the dark room. She said that the only other time she had ever felt so instantly, totally, instinctually afraid was her first time hearing a cougar scream at night in the woods. She instantly noped and flew all the way downstairs and flew the yard to tattle on her brother, only to see him hauling stuff around and helping their parents. As he'd been all morning and afternoon, apparently. Shocked and afraid of not being believed, even they asked why she looked so afraid, she simply answered, "I think there's someone in the attic." When pressed, she said she heard footsteps, and saw that the door was open when she went to look. Dad swore and went and got his gun from his truck, and instructed them to wait 15 minutes. If he didn't come back out, they were to all get in the truck and drive to the neighbor's place a couple miles down, and call the police. No cell phones back then. He went in, and after a very anxious wait came back out pissed as hell, demanding the kids fess up who had been messing around up there. Both denied it, and the family went to look as a unit, with friend reluctantly bringing up the rear. Someone had indeed pushed all the boxes and the mattress out of the way. The door was indeed unlocked and open. All that was inside, no light, no window, was an old rocking chair, and everything covered in decades of dust, with no sign that anyone but them had been in the room at all. No streaks, no footprints, just some ancient mouse shit and an old chair. Brother pointed to this as proof he couldn't have been the one, because how would he leave no signs? In the absence of other explanations, Dad didn't buy it. Brother got grounded for the next couple weeks for breaking the rules and sneaking around, and friend refused to go back to the attic the rest of the time they lived there, sleeping on the couch in the downstairs living room when she could get away with it, because the sound of steps and the rocking would still regularly wake her up. She told this story at a couple gatherings as an answer to similar scariest thing to happen to you prompts, but details left out included some eerie notes. Well into adulthood, years and years after they moved away, she still has recurring nightmares about that attic. It's always the same dream, but it goes one of two ways. In the dream it's like she's on a rail, and no matter how she tries to stop, go backwards, etc., She just smoothly glides along. Up the stairs, down the hall, into her brother's room, up the attic steps, unable to close her eyes or turn away. The way it usually goes is that she is frozen at the point right where she can see into the attic, and the door to the little room is open. Her brother's smiling face emerges, but she knows in her heart, it's not him. The not brother grins and beckons, and the attic gets shorter shorter, her unable to turn or run away, until she is just within arm's reach, and just as he lunges for her, she wakes up drenched in a cold sweat and crying. The other way it goes, it's the same all the way until the attic, but then when her brother's face peeks out, she knows it is him. In this version though, he's covered in thick dust, his hair, his skin, etc., except that tears have streaked his face. He calls out to her, but makes no noise. She can't understand what he's trying to say except for 2 words, "Help me." Then something pulls him back inside, and she is frozen, knowing in her gut that something terrible is happening to him, but she can't save him. This goes on until she wakes up racked with guilt and fear. I met her brother at a barbecue and asked him about the house, and the little room. Apparently, he never heard her side of the story. I didn't tell him details. He swore he never went up there for fear of spiders, and was pissed he was grounded but innocent because it meant missing out on some summer stuff he and friends had planned. He always assumed it was a prank by his sister where she panicked and lied when their dad reacted all serious and got his gun. I asked him if he remembered anything weird about the house, and he said the only thing he thought was weird was that he'd wake up knowing he dreamt, but not remember the dreams at all. Said it was only weird because he doesn't normally have a sense of dreaming at all, before or after that house, but while they were there the feeling happened all the time. Otherwise had only good/neutral memories from there. I never got the impression she was lying. Always spooked me hearing the story, because assuming all details are correct, there's too many big questions. What was she hearing at night? Why was the door open to the attic? Who moved all the boxes? How did the little room unlock, when none of them had the key? If someone had gone in, or come out, how were there no marks in the dust? My sister's room shared a wall with the living room and the couch was against this wall. My dad and stepmom would knock on the wall if they needed something. One night, my sister is doing her homework and hears a knock on the wall, so she shouts, "What?" No answer. This repeats several times before my sister gets pissed and storms into the living room shouting, "What?" The living room was empty as my dad and stepmom had left 30 minutes prior to go on a walk. There was a basement in the house that always made everyone feel uneasy, but it was great for storage. The dogs refused to go down there. My dad was grabbing something from the basement, and while going back up the stairs he had this sudden feeling of dread. The dogs started barking like crazy, so my dad started running up the stairs. When he closed the door at the top, the dogs stopped barking and he felt relief. My sister was home alone and was walking down the 40-ish foot hallway when she heard footsteps behind her. She looked back to see nothing, but when she started walking again the sound started again. She began running and the footsteps picked up the pace as well. She ran out of the front door into a friend's house and refused to be home alone in that house ever again. Was a pizza driver for a while back in college. Did a delivery out to the semi-country area late at night. This was before smartphones, Waze and all that. Of course, the road had no streetlights, so the only light came from people's porch lights, my car's headlights and the full moon. Finally found the right house and delivered the pizza to a sweet little old lady. But when I turned around to walk back to my car, I couldn't help but instantly stop. There was a strange sensation that I wasn't alone. I was being watched. But I looked around and didn't see anything. Of course, it was dark AF, so who knows? I slowly moved toward my car and the feeling didn't go away. It only intensified. It was like I was being watched before, but now I was being hunted or something. I looked around and still couldn't see anything. So, I shrugged, figured I was imagining things and opened my car door when suddenly I heard a clicking sound. Like something was tapping the pavement in the road really fast. I hopped into my car and barely got the door shut when this giant Cujo kind of evil dog jumped at the driver window. He was growling and you could just tell that he wanted a piece of me in a big way. He had drool coming off his mouth, his breath fogged the window and it was like I could feel the reverb of his growling in my chest through the window. It was only after the fact that I realized how close I came to getting the shit mauled out of me, or possibly killed, by some crazy bloodthirsty dog. Postscript: when I got back to the store, half the drivers had heard where I went for the delivery and they asked me about the dog. Turns out, they'd seen him before but nobody thought to warn me about it. Okay, I was living in this house a few years back that was notoriously weird. One night I was sleeping when I felt something touch me. Thought it was my brother because we shared a room. It was not. He was at his girlfriend's mom's place. In the room alone. Feel a hand on my back again, then a sharp pain. Unexplained scratch down my back. There was nothing on my bed and it was a memory foam mattress with a pillow top underneath with no springs. Even if there were springs, I sleep on my stomach. So obviously I sit up like what the hell. And I see this mass. Like 3-foot mass run from the bedside out the door, which opened more than it was, and into the living room where I never saw it again. I, having been already mentally messed over by physical abuse and general just depression, had single-handedly the worst panic attack I've ever had. A few years ago I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my kids, who were 8 and 10 at the time. My kids slept in a bunk bed, and when we first moved in they would fight over who got the top bunk, and my youngest usually won. Their room had a sliding glass door that led to our balcony, which overlooked some woods. They had thick blinds that were always closed at night, and nobody else shared the balcony with us. We also lived in a very safe, nice part of town with nice older neighbors. One night, I tuck my kids in for the night, read them a few stories, and they're falling asleep. I kiss them goodnight on their noggins and go to bed myself in the room right next to theirs. About an hour later, my youngest screams bloody murder and I hear a crash in their room. I jump up running into their room, thinking youngest must have somehow wiggled his way out of the top bunk. Sure enough, he's on the ground, head down and still screaming. I try to calm him down and ask if he's okay, thinking we definitely need to go to the ER. He looks up at me, grabs onto me and screams for me to take him out of there, so I go to the bathroom, which is right across the hall, and turn on all the lights to check him for injuries. Long story short, he's fine. Turns out he jumped from the top bunk and landed fine. I ask him why in the world he did that, and he finally blurts out to get away from the lady on the ceiling with the backwards head. My oldest was woken up by this point and was super annoyed at little bro, and told him there was nothing to be afraid of. I finally calmed him down, but from that night forward he absolutely refused to sleep in that room and insisted on going to bed with me, which I was okay with, but I did try to talk him into sleeping in his own comfy bed. Older bro even offered to let him take the bottom bunk permanently, but he wouldn't budge. A month goes by, and my eldest still sleeps on the top bunk. One night, he wakes us up by jumping off the top bunk and rushing into my bedroom and jumping in the bed with me and little bro. I ask him what's up, and he refuses to talk about it. I figure he must have watched a scary video or something that he shouldn't have at his cousin's house earlier, and just pat him on the back and tell him everything is okay and he's safe with me. So, all 3 of us guys are sleeping in my bed every night, and I try my best to get them to go back to bed in their bunks, and even go so far as to buy them cool tents that go over the tops of their beds with flashlights and comics. They love them and spend their time in there, but only while it's still light outside. I even buy them 2 pet mice with a nice big cage, thinking that having other living creatures in the room with them would be comforting. They love animals, but it doesn't work. My oldest finally tells me he saw a shadow crawling on the ceiling that looked like a woman with long black hair. He said that he was woken up by a flashing white light and thought his brother was turning his flashlight on and on again, but when he looked closer it was coming from the closet, and he saw the black figure crawling on the ceiling and fucking noped out of there. I was like, great, 2 kids who are scared of a monster in the closet. I talked to other parents and my ex, and we all tried to reassure them that they were safe, and there's no such thing as monsters. My ex and I were about to take them to a therapist. We were concerned there might be something more going on with them. Well, a few nights later, on a Friday night / Saturday morning around 3 a.m., the boys are asleep in my bed, oldest in the middle, youngest on the far left next to my bedroom window, and I was on the far right, facing the open bedroom door. Normally we would close the bedroom door, but we had just had an epic Nerf gun fight before going to bed, and all the doors were open. It was a great night. Anyway, I'm laying in bed snoring when I suddenly wake up. I open my eyes, and as they're trying to focus, I notice a white, flashing light reflecting on the wall outside my bedroom. I think it must be one of their flashlights losing its battery power or something and debate on whether I really want to get out of bed and turn it off, or just roll over and ignore it when I see the source of the light is slowly moving down the hall, getting closer to my bedroom door. I immediately thought intruder and quietly got out of bed and crept towards the doorway, trying to see what was going on. I peek out into the hallway and the light is flashing close to the ground from my kids' room. I don't hear footsteps, nothing. I look in their room, and the light stops. I'm freaked out, so I flip on the light switch and see nothing. Mice are chilling, nothing out of place, and I went over their entire floor looking for the source of that light and found nothing. We ended up moving out a couple of months later, and the boys got separate bedrooms and weren't afraid anymore. My oldest is 15 now, and I told him this story back in January and he turned white as a ghost, went silent and just stared at me. I was like, "What's the matter, kid?" He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're lucky you didn't look up. Years ago when I was 16 my dog died. He got cancer around his stomach and we had to put him down. I had this dog since I was 8, so for literally half of my life I lived with him. He was a Beagle/Basset Hound mix and was probably the chillest dog you could ever meet. Anyways, when we had to put him down I was really sad about it and I missed him a lot in the following months, still do. My kitchen had tiled floor and our hallway had hardwood floors, so when he was alive his nails made a very distinct sound on the floors. We also had a small bell tied to his collar for a time so we could hear him if he was getting into stuff. Well, after he passed, when I was home alone I continued to hear the very distinct sound of his nails on the floor and his bell jingling every now and then. At first it really freaked me out, but after the first few times I found it sweet that my little guy was still hanging around. It stopped after a few months and I took that as sign my little man had moved on. Not really scary or unsettling, but it's something I can't explain. We have no other animals and like I said these noises are very unique. Like I said though, it was nice hearing him around even after he was gone. I miss you, love you Charlie. I sleep on the ground floor, with my window open. I have 2 big dogs to protect me so I'm not really worried. However, this night I got woken up at 2 a.m. with my dogs growling, then all hell was slept loose as they both began to bark and snarl at the window. I looked at the window and to my horror a person is trying to climb inside. Then as my sleep-deprived brain tried to sort things out I realized it was my upstairs neighbor who suffers with dementia. My dogs too realized who it was and stopped trying to eat her. I got to my wheelchair and started asking to go back home. She told me she couldn't, that there was a man coming to hurt her. I tried persuading her that the man wouldn't know where she lived at all and she was safe. She still continued to try and climb through my window, pulling down my curtains and coming very close to pulling off the window frame. I told her she could come in through the front door, which wasn't really the safest thing for me to do, but I really didn't want her to fall and hit her head on the wall. But she wouldn't stop trying to climb through the window. After a while of trying to calm her she suddenly turned around and walked away. I'm in a wheelchair and there is no way I could have caught up to her. I went out. It was freezing mist outside and she had a nightgown on, but I had no idea in which direction she had turned. I called the ambulance and told them elderly lady with dementia had just walked off in the middle of the night. While waiting for them I tried knocking on my neighbor's door, to see if they had any contact numbers for her family. No one answered the door to me. Anyway, after an hour of waiting I called the police to see if she had been found. Nope, she's not even being looked for. So I reported her missing again and waited. After a while of a whole lot of nothing I called them again. They didn't have notice of my call? So they weren't looking for her still. I finally got through to a sergeant who took it really seriously and in 5 minutes I finally had police cars coming and looking for her. I was finally able to relax knowing it's in someone else's hands finally and tried sleeping on the sofa. Since I have no curtains to my bedroom now, the family knocked on my door in a few hours and let me know that the neighbor was safe and thanked me for trying to make sure she was okay. I'm going to be honest, I was a mess. I was crying just so relieved she hadn't wandered off onto one of the fields and died. That was one of the most stressful nights ever. The neighbor moved out into a care home not long after, so I'm a bit safer from someone trying to climb through my window at night now. The first time I saw her I was 6. We were playing the opposite of hide and seek. One person hides while everyone else looks, and once you find the person, you hide with them till there's only one person looking. It was my turn to hide and chose to hide under the stairs where my dad kept all the camping gear cause there were lots of things to hide under, behind, There was only one person left. With all of us cramped in the room under the stairs, the last person left was sitting on the stairs above us, my brother, and we could hear him yelling in his defeat to get us to surrender. In my hiding spot I could see the door that led out and it was cracked a little bit. A girl about my age poked her head in the room and waved at me. I had said out loud, "What's your name?" With no reply she vanished, which prompted me to follow after her, yelling at her to come back, ultimately giving up our hiding spot. Everyone under the stairs, brothers and cousins, starting yelling at me asking what the hell I was doing and who I was talking to. Nobody else had seen her and we couldn't find her upon searching. The next time I saw her I had gone over to the neighbor's house to play with the boy my age because they had just gotten a new puppy. The neighbor boy had 8 siblings, lol Mormons, all boys, and the oldest son had come home to visit. He came into the basement where we were playing. Shortly after I heard my name being called from upstairs by a girl. I had figured it was one of the neighbor girls as it was common to have friends show up uninvited in my neighborhood. Everyone had an open door policy. The same girl I had seen was standing at the top of the stairs. She told me to call over to my house and have my older brother come walk me home right now. We lived right next door. I didn't at all feel scared, and just did what she told me right then and there. My older brother was furious and couldn't understand why I couldn't just do the 15 seconds walk home by myself. I have multiple instances seeing and hearing from her when in the presence of that older neighbor boy. Always telling me it was time to go home or not leave my brother's side or be alone with him ever. I'm not sure why I had never questioned or feared her. I was one stubborn child and hated when told what to do. At the age of 8 I was sleeping when I had gotten shaken awake. It was her. She told me I needed to be really quiet and go wake my dad up because someone was outside my window. I did what I was told and went to wake my dad. He got his gun out of the safe by his bed and instructed me to stay with my mom. A few seconds later he started screaming at my mom to call 911. Sure enough, there was someone outside my window. When the officers were questioning me, I mentioned the little girl, which freaked my parents out. I told them about the girl for the first time as well as all the times I've seen her. They took me in to see the bishop as I was about to get baptized and due to meet with him anyway, and instructed to tell him all about her and when I've seen her. Which started me on all types of church therapy bullshit and vows of secrecy for getting a gift from God and blah blah blah. I saw her on the way home from my boyfriend's house one night in high school. I was driving at around midnight through a back road that had trees on all sides. I was coming up to an intersection where I had no stop signs but the perpendicular road did. She walked out from the tree line in front of me, causing me to slow to a stop just before the intersection. As soon as I stop, a car blows through the stop signs just in front of me, scaring the fuck out of me. I turned back to where she was and she just smiled and walked back into the tree line. Had I not stopped, I would have been hit on my side of the car by the person who blew through the stop signs. I've seen her in many other occasions. Call it hallucinations, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you want. But I'm grateful for her. I've never seen her and been scared. More at peace, kind of like seeing an old friend. Edit. Yikes, I didn't know this would be so offensive and triggering to so many people. I just wanted to share my positive experience with the unexplained when so many other posts were riddled with the spookies. So before you hop into my DMs to tell me I'm just schizophrenic, I have had plenty of assistance in the mental health department, and I am not schizophrenic, but I do appreciate your concern. At the end of the day, everybody's realities are different. Who are we to say that what someone experiences is false, just because you have never experienced it? To those asking how I personally feel about it, the supernatural, to be honest, I really don't know and have been on a journey to find that out since leaving my religion. As mentioned below, I have had many encounters with mental health professionals, and it has been brought up that it's a possibility that my unconscious mind is forcing my conscious mind to acknowledge and respond to potential danger. I don't at all want to discount my own personal experiences or reality, or the experiences of others for that matter, and I'm grateful beyond words for the protection and warning I've got from her, whether it be all in my head or not. But I also ask myself often, why me? Why do I get help and protection when so many need it more? And that is my inner struggle at the moment. Not wanting to disregard or be ungrateful for my many experiences with her. But I also work in pediatric behavioral health and see a lot of horrible and devastating things that happen to the innocent by the hands of another. It's often hard to think of her as being a guardian angel or a divine intervention when there are so many people who needed protection and didn't get it. Mr. Jones. Between 2008 to 2011 I used to struggle with fairly frequent sleep paralysis. I often had auditory hallucinations of tree branches and leaves cracking and thrashing in the wind during these episodes. I sought a sleep clinic and they did assist me in reducing the frequency and severity of hallucinations/episodes. But I will never forget Mr. Jones. Throughout my time in university residence, through a few rooms and a townhouse, I always had a closet visible to me from my bed. Around early 2009, before I had sought sleep clinic assistance, my auditory hallucinations had grown to audiovisual, with a man emerging slowly from my closet. His hands, eyes, and chest sprouted large dead tree limbs that terminated in dozens of spindly branches. I could always hear him first before he emerged. He never did get close to me, and usually I was able to disengage from my hallucination around the same time each episode, but this tree being haunted me for years. Finally, after significant efforts of a therapist and a sleep clinic, I was able to halt the sleep paralysis. Q 2013. A bad movie comes out. Mr. Jones. I'm up late, scrolling Netflix, and on a stark red and black background is that goddamn tree man. The movie poster was an almost picture-perfect version of Mr. Jones, a full 2 years after my sleep paralysis stopped. It's silly and obviously coincidental, but seeing that damn silhouette after the torment I felt and after so much time shook my foundations a bit. I haven't seen or heard Mr. Jones since, but I still recall that terror. I used to live in a very old triple-decker in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and I'm convinced that someone died there at some point by having a heart attack and falling down the stairs. I know that's very specific, but a lot of weird things happened on those stairs, and I had a disturbing recurring dream while I lived there of standing on the stairs, having a horrible chest pain, then falling, and that's when I woke up, just before hitting the floor. I would hear voices out in the stairwell right before I opened the door, and they would abruptly stop as soon as I opened the door. I was also followed around the house by a small dark figure, but I couldn't tell if it was a child or something else. I would feel and hear it walk around behind me, and I'd see it peeking around door frames and corners. It didn't feel threatening, just curious. The weirdest experience happened when my boyfriend was with me, though, and if there hadn't been a witness, I don't think anyone would have believed me. We both saw a large, dark figure quickly back away from my boyfriend as he approached the third-floor landing. I was on the second floor. The figure had been watching us from the railing, then backed into the far corner when my boyfriend went up the steps. He almost fell backwards in surprise, and we both screamed holy fucking shit and sprinted into the apartment. I never saw the large figure again, but I always felt like I was being watched in that house. I asked the landlord when I was moving out whether anyone had ever died in the house, and he just looked at me with wide eyes and said no, then dropped the subject. So, that's a yes. I imagine this comment will get buried because I got to the party late, but I figured I'd share anyway. When I was younger, maybe around 11, in 2003, I lived with my mother and sister in a 3-bedroom house. My parents had recently divorced. One night, I heard a muffled, foreign-sounding voice booming from the hallway. It sounded like it was giving a speech. I froze, scared to death, and went back to sleep. In the morning at the breakfast table, I told my mom what had happened. She froze and said, "You heard him too?" Apparently, 2 weeks prior she was vacuuming and heard a voice speaking in a foreign voice coming from upstairs. Stressed from the divorce, she chalked it up to stress and ignored it and continued to vacuum. Shortly after, one night, my sister flew down the stairs screaming and crying. I found out the next morning that the voice woke her up and was coming from the corner of her room. She assumed it was her computer, but her computer was shut off. Neither my mother nor I had told my sister what we had heard, so this turned out to be the third, isolated instance. To this day, we have absolutely no idea who or where the voice was coming from. One of my first nights in my new house, I thought I heard a door opening while I was reading in bed. So I very loudly got up, turned on the main light, smacked the wall a few times, to make sure I was heard, grabbed my handy dandy beat-in stick, which I have literally never used, and headed out into the living room. Kitty was staring at the front door, and I discovered it was unlocked, which is not normal. When I looked out the peephole, I saw 2 dudes staring at the house. I stuck my head into the window near the door and waved at them. They immediately got into their separate cars and drove off. I was a lone female living with my cat. Friends stayed over the next few nights and we added some more locks. I did not sleep more than 2 to 3 hours a night for 3 to 4 months, and what happens is, your brain wants its REM sleep and you dream while awake. So I was lying in bed reading when I heard what sounded like big bare feet coming up the stairs. I live alone and the doors were locked, so I kinda freaked out. And up pops the head of a gray alien looking towards me with malice. I jumped up in my bed, hit my head on the slanted roof and knocked myself out. Still a mark in my roof. Just as a little background, I was about 12. My parents were on some trip at the time with my sister, and my youngest sibling was spending the night with my aunt. I was asleep when I woke up at about 3 a.m. to the sound of a loud bang in the kitchen. We had 2 cats, so I thought it was the chunkier of the 2 jumping down from the counter. That was, until I rolled over anyways, seeing both the cats cuddled up on my bed. I, being the kind of person who would die first in a horror movie, got out of bed. As I got to the door, one of the lights in the hallway turned on. I brushed it off thinking my youngest sibling had come home in the middle of the night from my aunt's, which wasn't uncommon when they stayed over there. When I got to the hall though, the bathroom door was wide open. I peeked into my siblings' room and didn't see them. I thought that maybe I was just seeing things, that maybe the light had been on the whole time. So deciding to investigate the noise, I crept downstairs, doing the careful step over that one creaky stair I'm pretty sure everyone had. When I got downstairs, all the lights were on, which was strange, because I know I had turned them off. Mom had been snapping at us kids about it recently. I slowly walked through the living room, then dining room, then kitchen, until I was back in the hallway, making sure no one was there and turning off the lights. When I glanced down the hall, I noticed the basement door was closed, which was strange because the litter box was down there, so it stayed open. I opened the door to see all the basement lights were on. This made me really uneasy because I know for a fact I didn't turn those on. I never went in the basement when I was home alone. I hated it down there for a number of reasons. That's a story for another time. So I did what any logical idiot would do and grabbed a chef's knife from the kitchen before going downstairs to investigate. I walked around the basement and no one was there, so again I turned the lights off and left, heading back upstairs. Just as I started to walk down the first floor hall to go back to bed, I heard what sounded like a little girl's voice say my name. I froze, and honestly probably peed a little. It was loud and clear, yet still somehow sounded far away. I noped the hell out of there, ran up to my room, put the knife on my nightstand and hid under the covers. I stayed awake listening, and eventually scrambled to find my phone and text my parents asking when they'd be back. They didn't answer, probably because it was the butt crack of dawn, and stayed hiding under the covers, clinging to my phone and trying my hardest to stay awake. Eventually I fell asleep, and was woken up after a while by my mom, asking if I was okay and that my text had scared her and my dad. I said I was just tired and she left. I've tried really hard to reason this with myself, but I can't. I honestly don't really think about if I can avoid it, but it's one of those things that replays in my head when I can't sleep. Probably when my dog died and he visited me in a dream 2 weeks later to let me know he loves me and he's at peace. I know people will say it's just a dream, but unless you experienced it I can't even explain it to you. It was just as vivid as my waking life, to the point that I remember seeing his individual whiskers and I still remember it beginning to end 5 years later. In addition, as soon as he laid on my lap there was this insane feeling of euphoria and peace that just vibrated through my whole body. I used to be a heroin addict and I've never even felt euphoria like that while on heroin. Was almost a decade sober at the time it happened, FYI. He was with me then and no one will ever be able to tell me otherwise. I just hope other people get to experience the same thing sometime when they lose a loved one. I'm atheist, but that dream was so crazy that it convinced me without a doubt there is some sort of afterlife and I'll see him again. We live in an updated mid-century modern home that was built in 1968. There have been only 2 owners of the house before us, and the second owners were really just flippers who gutted/renovated it. The first owner was a woman who lived here presumably until she passed. When we moved in, our doorbell rang at all hours of the day and night at random. This would happen about 3 to 4 times a day. First we thought the neighborhood kids were messing with us, but we began to realize through our security cameras that no one was ever there. Eventually our dog stopped barking at the doorbell because we started to ignore it, thinking it was glitched. Eventually it just went out. On at least 2 occasions, the TV in our master bedroom has turned on by itself, both times late at night. We've replaced this TV, so the first time it happened was with the old TV, and the second was with the new one. They are different brands. The remote has been out of reach and both my spouse and I have been tucked in bed and or asleep both times. On one occasion, the Nest thermostat, which has a motion sensor that causes it to light up blue when you walk by it, lit up in the middle of the night when everyone was in bed asleep. I woke up about 2 minutes before it happened, which is also odd. It's located in the hall outside our bedroom, and we sleep with the door open. That was a little alarming. A couple of nights ago, not the first time, our dog climbed into bed with us, got up as close to the headboard as possible so he could be right next to us, sat down and stared up at the ceiling. He seemed unsettled and wouldn't lay down or get under the covers with us, which is what he normally likes to do, for at least 15 minutes. He just stared up at the ceiling. That's about all I got. We still live here, so I guess I can update as time goes on, lol. A couple years ago I was up late watching a movie one night. I'm talking like 1 AM here. It was like June or July maybe. There's a knock on my door. Scared the hell out of me. I flick on my porch light and look out the window. There's some dude just standing there. Just some regular looking guy in a gray hoodie. I live in a small town with an almost non-existent crime rate, so I don't think too much about it, but I'm still cautious because this is still weird. I live literally right next door to our local sheriff's department. At first I'm thinking it might just be somebody needing help, in which case I could direct him to the station super easily. I decide to crack open the door to see what's going on. The television and light in my living room are both on. The guy can clearly see that someone is home and awake. Probably why he knocked on my door. The guy tells me he's going door to door, asking for donations to replace Christmas gifts that were lost in a house fire earlier that day. Reminder, this was in the middle of summer, in the middle of the night. Not even close to Christmas. The guy didn't look or sound high or drunk or anything, and his clothes were pretty clean from what I could see, so I don't think he was homeless either. The way he was acting and talking, he seemed perfectly lucid and with it. It was just what he said to me that was super fucking weird. I tell the guy I can't help him. He thanks me anyway and walks away. I immediately called the police. Told the person I spoke to exactly what had happened, just in case this guy was up to something sketchy. This is where it gets a little creepy, well, creepier. Before I can tell him my address, the dispatcher asks me if I live in a certain area that's actually about a 15-minute drive away from where I am. I tell him no, I'm just right next door to them. I asked him why he asked. He says that not 5 minutes before I called, he received another call from someone in the aforementioned area, reporting the exact same thing I had just called in about. The description of the guy sounded almost identical to the guy who came to my door. The dispatcher said there were no fires reported that day. I never saw the guy again and never heard any more about it. I have aphantasia, which is relevant to the story. I can't visualize things and I have no visual memory. I remember the things I see by having a constant narration in my head, and I can remember what I thought. So, my little brother was always terrified of the basement and would not for the life of him go down there. I was also a bit older, so I had to be braver. I was always the one sent down to get stuff. My brother and I were talking about the basement one day, and I was prying about why he was so scared. He would barricade the door at night and stuff. He told me he sometimes hears things from down there, scratching and weird sounding talking in some language. I was immediately alarmed and told him someone must be sneaking in through the door down there. He said, "What door? There's no door down there." He even brought up that I can never remember anything visual, but I argued back that he hasn't even been down there for years. We argued back and forth. I went downstairs and came back up, proud to declare that there indeed was a door down there. He got really pale and upset and asked my dad if there was a door in the basement. Dad laughed and said, "A door to what? It's underground, of course not." I'm getting super mad. I know I can't remember things idly, but I just checked. Our little argument kept going a bit, me trying to get him to go down with me. Finally he did. No door. 4 concrete walls. I wailed, but I've been inside. My brother and I ran upstairs and barricaded the door, and neither of us would go down again. Everyone's weird ghostish stories seem to happen really young, and I got a few too, but since I was so young they're not really reliable. This story is from when I was probably about 14. I got home from school and my parents were still at work and my sister was doing who knows what. So I was laying on the couch watching TV, and as many 14-year-olds in an empty house would think, this is perfect time to partake in the act of masturbation. As I was in the act, I clearly seen a hand that looked like it was wearing a white glove come up next to the couch and slap down right next to my leg, enough to even feel the wind on my leg. At this moment I look down to the ground and see nothing at all. It wasn't an old house really or anything, just had odd things happen. My sister and father have both claimed to have seen someone walking around in their rooms at night. When I was a kid, I used to have a pure white Labrador named Elkie. Had her since she was a small nugget. I say she was pure white, but she had a little black spot near her tush. If it wasn't for that spot and her purple collar, she would just disappear in the snow. She was a big girl and I used to ride her around like a horse. I was a small kid, so don't worry, ha ha. She also knew places around the house and would take me there if I had asked her, like Elkie, kitchen please. She was the goodest girl. Anyways, we had to move to a different state and the place we were moving into couldn't allow pets. So Elkie had to stay behind. I missed her so much it hurt. As I got more comfortable, I found out she unfortunately passed away around March 14th that year. 4 months later my dad was making a service call to someone's apartment, and there, this lady had a puppy she had just gotten. She was only 4 months old. She was a pure white Labrador with a tiny black spot on her tush. When my dad entered the apartment, the puppy started going nuts. Lady told my dad not to worry, she didn't like strangers all that much and she'll calm down. Except, she wasn't barking cause she was afraid or wary, she was barking cause she was excited. When my dad sat on the floor, the puppy would sit exactly how Elkie used to sit and lay her head on his lap. Howl how she used to howl. Do things she used to do. Lady was stunned cause she never taught the puppy much of anything like what she was doing. She also just didn't like being around new people apparently. My dad told her I might sound crazy, but I think this is my old dog. In a joking matter, of course. He didn't think too much of it. But after his work was done and he was leaving, the puppy started whining and crying. Biting his pant leg trying to keep him from going. My dad got sad. He told me if he could, he would have offered to buy that dog off of her right then and there. But we couldn't. And he kept walking towards his van, and he told me hearing her cry and scratching the door the way she did hurt him too much. I'm crying just writing this out. Didn't know what to make of this as a kid. Still don't as an adult. Maybe she did manage to come back as a new puppy, and I could only hope that family loved her as much as I did. I miss you, girl. Was taking a shower in the master bedroom. Door at the end of the hall had been closed maybe half an inch. Get out into the hallway and the door is wide open. Draft/air pressure changes won't budge this door. I whipped open and shut every possible door to test it. A door to a laundry chute was moving every time from the change in pressure, but the bedroom door stayed unmoving. I fucking know, that door was shut because I was leaving a small surprise in there and made sure the door was where it was by measuring the width it was open with my finger when shutting it. Another time I was just laying back in bed on my phone in the dark and a finger creeped over the top of the screen and I just dropped my phone on my bed and rolled over, but I had to be just dozing for that one. I was staying at my parents' house in my old room during my first year of college. I had taken my bed to my new place, so I was sleeping on a folding trundle bed with my old nightstand and alarm clock. The ceiling fan had a light that hadn't worked in years. I was drifting off to sleep when I starting to feel this sinking feeling like I was descending. I just thought that it was a nice sensation to be literally falling into sleep. Moments later the whole bed stand collapses, I hit the floor, the broken light starts flickering on and off, and the old clock's alarm triggers. I got up shaking and turned everything off. And then walked into my parents' room, who were still awake with the light on like a terrified boy. That light kept on working after that, as it probably had a wire loose that was reconnected from me hitting the ground. Also, alarm clock likely hadn't been plugged in for a while and the alarm would have been reset. The bed was a piece of shit and I'm not surprised it collapsed. It's all explainable, but those three things happening together scared the hell out of me that night. I was taking care of my parents' house in the woods of Colorado. I woke up in the middle of the night to this black figure standing over me making a gurgling noise, not loud, it sounded like it was far away. But the figure was inches away from me. I'm not a stranger to sleep paralysis, the demon in the corner type thing, but this was different. I couldn't move, which carried over, but I was trying. It felt like I was tied down. My vision started to go red, almost like when you're injured in a video game. That blood effect that moves in from the edges. All of a sudden the figure fell on me. I could feel the weight pressing down on my chest, I couldn't breathe, I could feel my blood struggle to escape underneath it. Then it rolled off of my onto the other side of the bed and started laughing. Quietly, like it had just remembered an inside joke. But it was laughing in mock versions of other people's laughs, my mom's, my dad's, a few of my friends. It started to distort, it became the silhouette of my mom 5 years earlier, the laugh became a touch clearer, closer to hers. Then its hand slid over in the bed, very slowly, like it was nervous to touch me. It grabbed my hand and held on, fingers interlaced, it felt like solid fog, and it rolled like there was something liquid moving in waves underneath the surface. It kept holding on and kept laughing. Eventually the red in my vision faded into full black and I woke up almost a full 20 hours later. My body ached, it felt like my spine had been taken out and replaced. Moving was a chore, I had to relearn how to do all the simple things over the next hour or two until it all crashed back into me. I try not to remember it too much, in case it comes back. In a farmhouse built in the 1860s, I lived with my parents and grandfather whom we took care of in his late life. One day, in my boredom I was poking around in the basement when I found a small wooden plank at floor level, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet in measure. It was hidden behind a table and some other sentimental items and I had never seen it before. Out of curiosity, I poked around until I found that a seemingly pointless dusty light switch on the wall produced a small but audible click at the side of the plank when flipped. The plank didn't move in any way, but I found that if I pressed on it slightly, it opened like a cupboard door. I ran upstairs to grab a flashlight, this was before I had a phone, and turned it on to see inside. I saw several things which immediately caught my attention, such as a framed photograph covered in decades of cobwebs and dust, which depicted a young military-aged man in a German Stahlhelm-type helmet with a Luger handgun beside it. My first immediate thought was, oh my god, my grandfather was a Nazi, which was funny in hindsight, since he was born and raised Jewish before my great-grandparents moved from France to the US circa 1921. But it's more strange than that. His uncle and aunt stayed in France and moved to Germany at about the same time, before having a son and moving to the US about 6 years later. What surprised me most was a letter written and placed under the picture frame, dated 1930s, which was addressed to my grandfather's aunt and uncle in Illinois, which stated that he had run away and joined the German army. Of great importance moving forward, you should know that my grandfather's cousin had a common last name and didn't appear to fit any stereotypical Jewish features, and he had renounced the Jewish faith. Come to find out that once he fully realized what was actually going on in Germany, he fled the army and the country, but not before a picture of him was taken and he smuggled his helmet and his commanding officer's pistol back into the US, where he managed to slip into obscurity, appearing only once to get rid of his mistakes by hiding them away inside my grandfather's childhood home beneath the basement. So yeah, this is the highly condensed story of how my grandfather's cousin ran away from home and joined the Nazis, only to get freaked out and flee to America and hide his things in my home 60 years before I was born. Caught a very obvious mistake, changed 1960s to 1860s. Sorry y'all, this came out much longer than I anticipated. I promise it's worth the read. This was about 10 years ago when I was in my early teen years. 2 girlfriends and I were going to watch another one of our friends sing at a local restaurant. We did not have a ride, so we decided to walk. It was about 8 to 9 p.m. We decided to take a shortcut which led us through a ditch that ran through the back of people's houses. The ground was a bit elevated, so as we walked, it was easy for us to see people's backyards. We came across one particular backyard. Right above this house's backyard fence, there was a mysterious round black thing. We couldn't quite figure out what it was from a distance. So, my friends and I agreed I should get closer. I reach out with my hand, and just as I was about to touch it, it turns and looks me dead in the eye. Turns out this mysterious black thing was the back of someone's head. Not just someone though, the only thing I can describe it as was a dead woman with no face. Her face was pale as paper and I couldn't distinguish her eyes or any facial figures. We ran as fast as we could. It didn't make any sense as to why an actual person would be standing there, and we didn't know anyone that lived at the place who could potentially be pranking us. Fast forward to about 2 years ago, I am reading a scary story on Reddit. Well, it just so happens that the person who wrote the story went through a pretty similar thing, and it was in the exact same ditch, same city, same entity. I couldn't believe it. I still cannot comprehend how any of this was possible. It's not much, but I had a very unsettling experience when I was 14. It is explainable, but I think you'll like it anyway. My sister had a foil helium balloon of a generic cartoon character. Being a young nerd, one day with time on my hands I went into my sister's room and pulled the balloon down from the ceiling where it had been for days and attached a small bag of torn paper as ballast, adjusting the bag until the balloon was neutrally buoyant. Tiring of the novelty, I went back into the living room and started watching a program. After about half an hour or so I was minding my own business when I suddenly glimpsed a figure hulking nearby. Because I was supposed to be alone, I did a shriek and nearly jumped out of my skin, but it was just the helium balloon. There must have been a current of air moving from my sister's room to the living room, and it had moved this cartoon character balloon silently, perfectly silently, to within a foot of me without me detecting it. I put it back in my sister's room and pulled the door mostly closed, just wide enough for the dog to come and go in search of sunbeams, which she would follow around the house at the time. About half an hour after that I went to the bathroom, and again, nearly jumped out of my skin. At the end of the hallway it looked like a figure was standing, but when I switched the light on it was just that damned balloon again. It turns out that the gap I'd left had been just wide enough for a current of air to move it out of my sister's room, only this time towards the front door. As I looked, the balloon slowly turned, until the cartoon character was looking straight at me. I took it, removed the ballast, and let it drift up to my sister's ceiling again. That was the last time I experimented with neutral buoyancy. I'd nearly shit myself twice that day. So it's explicable, but each time I glimpsed that damned balloon mooching about in an unexpected place I damn near had a heart attack. I, 17M, was home alone and my whole family were at least 2 hours away. I was having the time of my life, eating all the food in the whole kitchen, binge watching every Netflix series under the sun, you name it. I was doing it all. It was about 8 p.m. in December, so it was already pretty dark. I closed the blinds and got back under my blankets and pillows. I heard a huge bang coming from my garage. It startled me, but expected that my cat had probably just knocked something down. Unfazed, I walked into my garage ready to shout at my cat when I saw him sitting on the kitchen table. I don't own any other pets and there was no way something else could have gotten in from the outside. I continued walking into the garage and turned on the light. Nothing was there. My parents had taken the car, of course, and right in the middle of the floor, a lawn mower that I had never seen in my whole entire life was just sitting there. It was an extremely distinct lawn mower. It was yellow and black and looked really clean. I was still confused as it was obviously not there when my parents were here because they had the car sitting where the lawn mower was. I shrugged it off and went to message my mom and dad asking if they had borrowed the neighbor's lawn mower, or had bought one. They were confused and I began to get annoyed at them. After about half an hour of text fighting, they said they haven't associated with a lawn mower for a long time and I must be playing some kind of prank of them. I went to the garage to show my parents a picture of it. When I tell you, I legitimately pissed myself, I'm not even joking. My heart sank. It was gone. The lawn mower was gone. I promise on all things possible, there was a lawn mower there. It was just gone. Like I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't a dream because it was just too real, and I had been drinking cups and cups of coffee. There was no way I could have gone to sleep. My parents came home angry that I was pranking them. This was a few months ago, but I still think about this shit every single night. I still wonder if I'm going to see it again one day, or maybe it really was just a figure of my imagination. But it still leaves the story untold. Why was I so scared if it was a dream? Why, out of all things, would I imagine a bright, yellow, clean lawn mower? My parents and friends still don't believe me, but I promise it's true. I'm so confused right now and this BS never leaves my mind. Not scary, but definitely unusual. My father died of pancreatic cancer 5 years ago at the young age of 60. His last week of life was spent catatonic in palliative care. It was rough on us and I didn't leave his side for that whole week. The night he died I cried myself to sleep and had horrible dreams. At some point in the night I woke up to someone gently rubbing my back. That's how my dad would wake me up when I was a little kid. He didn't like shocking us out of sleep and preferred to wake us up slowly. I live alone, so you think I would have been startled awake by the touch, but I woke up calm. Only when I opened my eyes did the pressure on my back disappear. Obviously no one was there, and logically I should say it was my mind that fabricated the scenario to help me in my grief, but after that moment something switched in my brain and I was at peace with my father being gone. I firmly believed that this was him saying goodbye and letting me know he's okay. I came home and there was a tube of chapstick sitting upright on the kitchen counter. I don't use chapstick, I never buy it, I hadn't had anyone over in weeks. Everything was locked. It just seemed like it must have come from nowhere. Then later I got a phone call. I used to answer the phone by saying, "This is my first name." When I did, the person on the other end said my last name and then hung up. The phone call came from the area code that I was living in, despite me having an area code from another part of the country. I called the number back, but they would just answer and hang up. I waited a few days and called the number again, but this time from a payphone in another city. They picked up and said my first name. I said, "Yeah." And they hung up again. How did they know it was me calling when it was from a payphone in another city? I paid for one of those who's calling me services to find out who the number belonged to. It was just some guy. When I googled his name, the only result I got was a blank web page where if you scrolled to the bottom, it had his name and phone number. I couldn't find any address or background information for this person. Afterwards, my phone would go into roaming whenever I tried to make a phone call. This all freaked me out. I got the feeling like I was being watched or followed. I decided to move to a new apartment. On the day I was packing my things in the moving truck, a helicopter showed up and hovered over my home for a few minutes. It wasn't high up either, it was really low, directly over my house. I would occasionally call the number from different payphones, but nobody ever answered.